Hey guys, tonight we're settling into a tale of ivy crowns, drunken inspiration, and the exact moment theater decided it needed a break. You're standing at the edge of an open-air stage in ancient Athens, surrounded by the murmurs of 1,000 itchy tunics and sun-drenched brows. The scent of roasting chestnuts mingles with the vague funk of unwashed sandals. A priest swings a smoking censer, and someone beside you sneezes into their peplus. And in the middle of it all, a grinning god with a wine jug and a plan. You're not just watching a play tonight, you're witnessing the invention of intermission, and you probably won't survive the heat without it. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop a comment with your city and local time. Let's see who's still awake across the globe. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're Dionysus now, or at least that's how you feel as you sashay through the marble streets of Athens with leopard print robes flapping and your thyrsus, a staff tipped with a pine cone, tapping rhythmically beside you. You're not walking, you're gliding. Barefoot, confident, possibly a little tipsy. A cluster of mynods follows behind you, singing off-key and waving fennel stalks like they've never heard of crowd control. You bless them anyway. You're not here for politics or war. You're here for joy. Or more specifically, the kind of joy that involves masks, poetry, blood sacrifices, and at least one donkey wearing a wig. You've got plans. Theater, after all, is your baby. See, mortals have been telling stories forever, around fires, over soup, probably during long sessions of communal olive pitting. But you bring the drama out of the dining room and slap it onto a stage. You want the whole city watching, laughing, crying, then laughing again, but like nervously. You enter Athens during a moment of transition. The city's growing powerful, wealthy, full of artists and thinkers, and men with opinions so loud they echo through the agora. And in the middle of this civic ambition is you, a god with no temple big enough to contain your vibe. So what do? You charm the city into creating an entire festival in your honor. Not just a potluck or some flute solos in the square. No, you push for days of public performance. The city Dionysia, a religious festival technically, but it quickly becomes the Super Bowl of Attica. People arrive in droves. Farmers leave their fields. Philosophers pack up their scrolls. Even the stiffest aristocrat pulls out his fancy sandals and shows up. Why? Because you're Dionysus, and missing your party is basically sacrilegious. Also, there's wine. In this festival, the centerpiece is drama, and not the kind that involves arguing over goats, though there's some of that too. We're talking full-on theatrical productions, chorus lines, tragic deaths, riddles, ghosts, prophecies, costumes so padded the actors sweat out their entire breakfast. You watch from a shadowy spot on the edge of the theater of Dionysus, grinning behind your ivy wreath. It's carved into the south slope of the Acropolis, a stone half-circle that cradles the stage like the palm of Olympus itself. Birds soar above it, vendors hawk olives, and somewhere behind you, a child is definitely trying to sneak a sip of his father's wine. Your presence? It's everywhere, in the painted masks, in the libations poured, even in the themes, mortality, excess, transformation. You're not just the god of wine, you're the god of escape, and it's working. People sit for hours enraptured by the rise and fall of heroes. The chorus chants in unison. The actors gesticulate wildly, sometimes a go to sacrifice for good measure, because what's tragedy without a little livestock? Still, even as the festival flourishes, you notice a problem forming. It creeps in slowly, like a sandal blister. Mortals are tired. They try not to show it. They shift politely. They fan themselves with laurel leaves. They pretend to be enthralled by the 12th consecutive lament about fate and vengeance. But you can feel it, the creeping numbness of oversaturation. Even the most devout worshiper can't process 3 full tragedies in a dithyramb without reaching for the mental wine jug. And so you, Dionysus, patron of theater, god of revelry, champion of the weird and wonderful, begin to think maybe they need a moment, a pause, a breath, something between the agony of Orestes and the moral collapse of Ajax. Something perhaps entirely new. You don't announce it yet, you just plant the seed. Maybe during the next festival you whisper to the chorus leader, "Take 5 after the second play." Let the crowd stretch. Let the actors drink something other than their own sweat. It's a radical notion, a break in the middle of a sacred procession of art and suffering. But your voice carries weight, even if it's slurred slightly from divine Merlot. The chorus nods. The priest looks skeptical. The playwright squints like you've just asked him to rewrite half the script. Still, the idea has landed, and it's only going to grow. After all, if anyone understands the value of pacing, it's the god who turned partying into a philosophical act. You don't get to be the god of theater without knowing a thing or two about spectacle and patience. So as the city Dionysia unfolds year after year, you, Dionysus, observe how the Athenians increasingly treat your festival like a glorious, sacred endurance test. It's not just 3 days of plays, it's practically a spiritual marathon. The entire polis gathers before dawn, elbow to elbow on stone benches, bleary-eyed and already sunburned. They're here for the works of Aeschylus, Sophocles, Euripides, but also for you. And yet, somewhere between the second and third tragedy of the day, a strange transformation happens. The audience goes from deeply invested to deeply glazed. The sun is relentless. The stone seats are not kind to the human backside. And the chorus is currently chanting the same 4-line refrain for the 9th time, while a spear-wielding character rides dramatically across the stage like a shrimp caught in sea foam. This is the moment you, god of revelry and disruption, take quiet mental notes. The mood is slipping. Not because the play is bad, it's probably a masterpiece, but because mortals can't focus on cosmic doom while their legs have gone numb and their wineskins are empty. The city Dionysia itself is a paradox. It is structured chaos, a highly ritualized celebration of disorder. On the surface, it's civic and pious, dedicated to you, involving processions, sacrifices, and a whole lot of serious mask wearing. But it's also a time of suspension. Regular rules loosen, slaves attend, citizens mix. Even politicians forget their debates for a while and cheer for men in padded costumes pretending to be blind prophets or weeping widows. At its core, this festival was meant to shake people out of their routines. And nothing shakes a human quite like a chorus of 50 men bellowing in unison about fate. But you, Dionysus, sense something else brewing. A tension, a fatigue. Maybe it's the crowds getting bigger. Maybe it's the scripts growing longer. Or maybe it's the quiet knowledge that no human can weep over 3 back-to-back deaths without needing, at the very least, a fig roll and a moment to contemplate whether their sandals are truly festival-ready. And so the city Dionysia adapts, because it has to. You don't issue a divine proclamation. There's no lightning bolt announcing Act 2 begins in 15 minutes. Instead, your influence works like your wine. It seeps, it swirls, it makes people bold. The first sign is subtle. Performers start incorporating brief pauses between plays, unofficial moments for the crowd to shift, yawn, talk among themselves. The priest doesn't stop them. He's halfway through his own amphora. Soon the interlude takes shape. Someone starts bringing small flutes and plays a lilting tune while the next set is being adjusted. A vendor, seizing opportunity like a true child of Hermes, begins wandering through the aisles with roasted chickpeas and candied walnuts. The audience perks up. Children stop fidgeting. Elders whisper less about death and more about whether they have the time to use the public latrine before the next monologue about hubris. Even the actors are grateful. Between performances, they remove their heavy masks, catch their breath, and drink cool water laced with thyme. The break becomes a balm. And then, your favorite moment, someone calls it what it is, an intermission. Or, well, a break in the festival rhythm, a pause between sacred narratives. The name doesn't matter yet. What matters is the effect. Theater, once a hammer of non-stop emotional bludgeoning, becomes something more sophisticated. It has flow, contrast, breathing space. It's the difference between chugging a jug of wine and sipping it slowly while watching the stars emerge over Mount Hymettus. And in that contrast, the drama itself grows stronger. By giving the audience time to reflect, they come back sharper, hungrier, ready to care again, ready to mourn Hector's ghost or rage against unjust kings with a fresh heart and a full belly. Historians still argue whether this change was spontaneous or divinely inspired. Some credit the evolution of stagecraft. Others whisper that it was the will of Dionysus himself, a silent nod from the god of rhythm, rest, and redirection. You, of course, don't clarify. You just smile through your beard and refill your cup. The Athenians never look back. The festival becomes known as much for its pace as its pathos. People begin timing their arrival to catch certain plays, strategizing how best to avoid the heat or make it to the olive vendor before he sells out. The intermission, once unthinkable, becomes expected. There's even gossip about one poet, name lost to history, who tried to run his 3 tragedies without a break and was booed by a sweaty crowd into oblivion. His chorus tripped over each other. A mask melted. Someone fainted. Legend says he never wrote again, and instead opened a tavern specializing in fig wine and bitter monologues. That's how culture shifts, not with a decree, but with collective exhaustion and the creeping realization that art is best digested with snacks. And in this delicious pause, something remarkable happens. The audience's identity deepens. They aren't just passive observers anymore. They're participants. They discuss, they debate, they gossip about characters and costumes. They argue over whether this year's tragedians were as good as last year's. Some even try their own impromptu performances during the break, climbing onto small stones to recite stolen lines, earning applause or laughter, or occasionally pomegranate rinds. Theater becomes a space of communion, of rest, of renewal. And you, Dionysus, watch it all unfold with the calm of a deity who knew this would happen all along. You lounge against a theater column, grapes in hand, as the sun slides behind the Acropolis and the murmurs of the crowd build again. The play is about to resume. The masks are going back on. Tragedy is poised to strike again. But the people, they're ready for it now, thanks to you. You're seated in the shade of a fig tree now, still invisible to mortal eyes but thoroughly enjoying yourself. The city Dionysia is hitting its stride, and the crowds are pouring in like barley wine from a cracked amphora. But before this well-oiled machine of tragedy and snacks could exist, someone had to take the plunge. Someone had to be first, to stand before the crowd, say actual words in character, and suffer gloriously in front of 1,000 itchy Athenians. That someone was Thespis. Yes, that Thespis. The guy so legendary he gave us the word thespian. Not that he knew he'd be memorialized forever in drama club posters and overpriced acting schools. To him, it was just another wild idea in the haze of Dionysian inspiration. You remember it clearly, because of course you were there. It started with dithyrambs, long chanted hymns delivered by large choruses of men stomping in rhythm, their voices rising and falling like waves. They didn't act so much as declare, but then Thespis did something no one expected. He stepped out from the chorus and spoke as a character. Not about the god, not about a hero, as the hero. The crowd collectively blinked. He did it again. And just like that, theater split open like a pomegranate. That moment, small, almost accidental, was the tectonic shift. The chorus kept singing, yes, but now there was this other element, a single figure, a voice, a persona, with emotions and conflict and a really impressive leather belt. It was risky. People had expectations about worship, and those expectations usually didn't include solos. But Thespis strutted around in his cart-turned stage, painting his face with wine dregs and crushed berries, daring anyone to tell him this wasn't religion. Some scholars still argue whether Thespis was the first true actor or just the first one to get famous. There may have been others before him, lost to time and poor publicists. But Thespis became the symbol, the pioneer, the first soul brave, or drunk, enough to embody the gods before a crowd of very opinionated Greeks. Naturally, you were delighted. You, Dionysus, weren't a god of statues and solemn temples. You were about transformation, about surrendering to roles, about slipping into other skins and letting go. And Thespis, he got it. He started small, one actor, one mask, but the audience wanted more. They wanted bigger stories, more voices. So Thespis added a second actor, then a third, more masks, more props, more chances to gasp and weep and gossip afterward over cups of spiced wine. And you were there for all of it, lounging behind a fig crate, munching grapes, watching as theater grew from hymn to spectacle. Mortals began building wooden stages, crafting props, arguing about costume choices. One poet demanded to wear real goat horns for authenticity and accidentally gored a chorus boy. He apologized with the poem. Even the chorus evolved. Once a tight, rhythmic mass, it started taking on narrative duties, echoing the audience's fears, hopes, and moral confusion. They became the ancient equivalent of group text reactions, only more tunic-heavy and less emoji-based. The crowd changed too. They learned to anticipate beats in the performance. They leaned in when characters quarreled. They clutched their robes when a fate worse than death was announced, usually in verse, and usually involving a lot of hand-waving. Not everyone was on board. Traditionalists grumbled that the sacred dithyramb was being hijacked by theatrics. One priest claimed Thespis was corrupting the youth with emotional excess and overly enthusiastic gesturing. He later joined a chorus himself after admitting it was actually kind of fun. Then came the competitions, because of course the Athenians made it competitive. Playwrights would enter trilogies of tragedies, yes, 3 full plays, plus a satyr play to lighten the mood at the end. Imagine binge-watching the saddest series of your life, and then ending with drunk, half-goat men dancing around making jokes about onions. You loved it. The best dramatists emerged from this crucible. Aeschylus, who added a second actor and painted stories with moral weight. Sophocles, who added a third actor and subtle psychological depth. Euripides, who just set everything on fire emotionally and hoped no one noticed. And in the background of it all, you, always you. People started to notice patterns. Good plays felt divine, like you were inside them, and they were right. You were in the cadence of the lines, in the costume changes, in the masked faces that turned joy into horror with one tilt of the head. Still, you noticed a problem beginning to creep in again. Ironic, really. Now that there were more plays, more actors, more structure, everything took longer. One day you counted, the performance schedule began before sunrise and ended near moonrise. The crowd was exhausted. Even the priests were snoring. They needed something, again, a break, but more than that, a rhythm. That's when your thoughts returned to Thespis. Not just the acting, but the pacing. He hadn't just introduced dialogue. He'd created a new tempo. Drama, rest, drama again. So why not apply that to the whole day? You leaned back, smiling under the fig tree, and began whispering to the breeze. Another pause was coming. A better one. More structured, less desperate. Because theater wasn't just about performance anymore. It was about timing. By now, you can feel it in your bare divine feet. The rhythm of the crowd, the breathing of the city, the strange magic that lives in painted wood and shouted poetry. You, Dionysus, are everywhere and nowhere, slipping between masks, flutes, and fidgeting mortals like mist through laurel branches. And speaking of masks, oh, the masks, you watch a boy, no more than 13, slip on a heavy clay-painted face with exaggerated eyebrows and a gaping mouth. In an instant, he transforms. He's no longer Thanos, son of a fishmonger, but a betrayed prince, dripping with sorrow and foreshadowed doom. The mask does more than conceal, it liberates. That's the magic you've always understood. Sometimes to show your truest self, you have to hide your face first. In the early days, the masks are crude. Animal hides stretched over wooden frames, painted quickly and unevenly. But as theater evolves, so do they. Artists perfect the contours. They shape emotion into plaster. Rage, sorrow, madness, laughter. Some even engineer built-in mouth cones to project voices better across the rocky slope of the theater of Dionysus. And behind those masks, mortals dripping sweat, hearts hammering, hoping their voices will carry and that they don't forget their lines. Or worse, trip over their own chiton. You love them. The chorus, meanwhile, remains the backbone of the play. 20, 30, even 50 men moving in unison, singing, dancing, reacting. They wear identical masks, becoming a single entity. Not characters exactly, but emotions, conscience, the city's whispering soul. Sometimes they mourn, sometimes they mock, sometimes they just yell dramatically in perfect I-ams. They're your favorite. You remember the first time a chorus missed their cue, and one poor soul shouted an entire antistrophe solo while trying not to fall off the stage. The crowd didn't notice. They thought it was avant-garde. Later that night, the performer threw up from nerves and joy. You made sure his wine jug never emptied again. The masks and chorus serve a deeper purpose too. They turn the performance into a ritual. Watching a tragedy isn't like watching a puppet show. It's closer to attending a funeral where the deceased is also the murderer and the audience might be next. There's something holy about it, something terrifying, but not too terrifying, thanks to a little invention called the satyr play. That's where things get weird. After 3 full tragedies, each more soul-wrenching than the last, the audience is teetering. They've cried, they've gasped, they've sat in the blazing sun until their tunics stick. And just when they think they can't take one more doomed oracle or poetic death by javelin, in prance the satyrs. Half goat, half drunk, and wholly chaotic, the satyr chorus charges on stage, clutching wineskins and fake phalluses. They mock the monks. They fart during serious speeches. They make lewd jokes about things that definitely weren't in the original myth. And you applaud with divine laughter. Some historians still argue whether the satyr play came from genuine reverence or just from someone getting too rowdy with a flute. You know the answer, but you're not telling. The point is, it works. The satyr play releases the tension, reminding the audience that after all the tragedy, after all the fate, death, and noble suffering, there is still ridiculousness, still mess, still life. And that's your gospel, isn't it? You, Dionysus, god of wine and madness, of frenzy and performance, understand something the other gods do not. Mortals can't sustain seriousness forever. They need contrast, they need shadow and light, grief and joy, screaming actors and giggling satyrs. You also notice that the chorus, once rigid and sacred, begins to evolve in these interstitial moments. They start ad-libbing, they interact with the audience. One chorus leader points at a man in the front row and improvises a joke about his sandals. The crowd roars. You smile. It's all part of the ritual. And still, even within this growing celebration of voice and costume and chaos, the people begin craving structure. Something to guide them through the emotional peaks and valleys. You watch the high priest nervously glance at the sun. You see mothers tug their children toward shade. You hear the muttering in the crowd. When is the next one? Should we eat now or after the satyrs? They need more than just a break. They need rules for the break. So you begin whispering again to playwrights, to chorus leaders, to vendors. You nudge the idea of scheduled pauses, divine pauses, time set aside between the masks and music, where people are meant to reflect, recharge, maybe gossip a little. One chorus master takes your hint too literally and choreographs a dance called the Pause of Pythagoras, which involves 17 minutes of silent shoulder rolls. The audience hates it, but they talk about it, so you consider that a win. And meanwhile, the intermission becomes a kind of sacred punctuation, no longer just a relief, it's a rite, a place for discussion, for opinions, for anticipation. Old men argue whether the hero should have stabbed the king. Teenagers dare each other to sneak up to the edge of the stage. Merchants circulate with cold jugs of rosewater and figs rolled in sesame. Somewhere a flute plays a gentle tune as the sun shifts just enough to cast long shadows across the theater steps. And when the chorus files back in, when the allo sounds again, and a new actor steps onto the stage with a fresh mask and heavier fate, the crowd is ready. They lean forward, they hush themselves, they're with you again. Because thanks to the mask, the chorus, and the pause, you, Dionysus, have given them more than entertainment. You've given them rhythm. You know the sound well by now, the subtle shuffle of sandals on stone, the slow exhale of 1,000 people realizing that yes, the next tragedy is about to begin, and no, they still haven't found shade. The air smells like sweat, olive oil, and someone's regrettable lunch. You, Dionysus, bask in it. This is your crowd, this is your domain, but something's off. It starts with a cough, then a fidget, then someone stands up. During the climax, you watch as a man awkwardly steps over knees and goatskin bags to find the latrine, muttering apologies. It's not just him. Heads begin to turn, eyes drift. A bored-looking teenager starts juggling grapes. The tragedy is unfolding, yes, but so is fatigue. This is what happens when mortals push themselves past the narrative limit. 3 tragedies in a row might be noble, but it's also exhausting. These are not short pieces. They don't skim. They don't breeze. These are works about vengeance, incest, doomed prophecies, and the sheer unbearable weight of being mortal. And no matter how loud the chorus sings, there's a moment when the audience starts to wonder, when do we eat? You float invisibly through the rows, amused. Mortals were never designed for this much uninterrupted sadness. Not even the Greeks, who are practically professional mourners. You remember one year when a new playwright decided to stage his trilogy as a single continuous performance. No chorus breaks, no satyrs, no pauses. By the second act, people were using their hymnations as pillows. By the third, someone's donkey had wandered into the orchestra and stood directly in front of the lead actor. The donkey was the only part people remembered. A potter even sculpted it. That disaster taught you something. If tragedy was going to survive, it had to learn to breathe. So you start planting more little seeds in mortal minds. First, someone proposes interludes, musical moments between the heavier plays. They're light, instrumental, a bit of reed pipe here, a soft tambourine there. Then someone else suggests comedy, not the full satyr kind, but witty dialogue, spoken by a masked fool who interrupts the tension just long enough for the audience to remember they're still alive. And finally, a theater official speaks aloud what everyone's been thinking. There should be a break, a real one, not just space between plays, a designated pause where nothing happens, a moment to stretch, sip wine, argue about the plot, and complain about the actor who obviously flubbed his line about divine justice. You nearly kiss him, but instead you whisper through the reeds. Make it sacred, you urge, not an interruption, an offering. And so it begins, the first true intermission. It doesn't have a name yet, but it has a purpose. Right after the second tragedy, a flute sounds, not somber like the Aulos, but playful. Performers exit the stage. The crowd exhales as if it's been holding its collective breath for 2 hours. At first, people are unsure. Should they stand? Should they talk? Is this allowed? But soon the atmosphere shifts. Someone starts handing out figs dipped in honey. A child begins dancing. The merchant from the harbor starts singing a parody of the last play, complete with goat impressions. The crowd howls, even the priests laugh. This pause, it works. And better yet, when the actors return, the audience is more engaged than ever. They've processed, they've refreshed. Their minds are open again to pathos, to poetry, to the beautiful despair that is Greek tragedy. You, Dionysus, sip invisibly from a goblet and nod in satisfaction. It's not just about making space for vendors. It's about pacing, balance. Theater, like wine, needs to breathe. Of course, not everyone agrees. There's always a critic. One gray-bearded philosopher, probably named something like Philocles the Unimpressed, sits stiffly through the break, arms crossed. These interruptions, he grumbles, are frivolous. They dilute the purity of the drama. He's ignored by the crowd, who are too busy cheering on a local baker doing a surprisingly good impression of Electra's final scream. Still, you respect his devotion. You just think he's wrong. Because what he calls dilution, you call evolution. And anyway, even Philocles eventually sneaks off to the wine stand when he thinks no one's looking. Soon the break becomes expected. It's no longer an awkward experiment. It's a feature. Theaters adjust their schedules. Playwrights write with the pause in mind, structuring their stories around it. One ambitious dramatist even ends his second play on a cliffhanger, just to keep the audience buzzing during the break. Will Antigone bury the body? Someone whispers over olives. I heard she already did, someone else replies. You're thinking of last year's version. The intermission becomes part of the narrative dance, a ritual unto itself. It's no longer just a gap. It's a turning point, a moment of collective breath before plunging back into the depths of human suffering and dramatic irony. And in that breath, something deeply Dionysian happens. The crowd connects, not just to the play, but to each other. They laugh, they debate, they flirt, they share figs. For a moment, the boundaries between performer and spectator, between sacred and mundane, begin to blur. Everyone becomes part of the show. And you beam with divine pride. Because this chaotic, sun-baked, fig-sticky, barefoot communion is exactly what you envision. Theater as transformation. The pause, not as absence, but presence, a gift. It starts with a yawn. Not a rude yawn, just the quiet, involuntary kind that creeps across 1,000 faces when the fifth speech about destiny drones on and the sun bakes the back of your neck like olive bread. And if mortals are yawning, well, so are gods. You stretch on your divine perch above the theater, vines dangling lazily from your elbow, and squint at the stage. Another tearful farewell, another monologue, another stabbed relative. It's good stuff, really. Poetic, tragic, soaked in metaphor. But even you, Dionysus, start humming to yourself halfway through the fourth eulogy in under 2 hours. You don't say it aloud, you're not cruel, but deep down you're bored. And if you're bored, that's a problem. Because you are the god of this entire spectacle. Without you, they'd still be shouting stories at sheep in a vineyard. So you do what any benevolent, wine-soaked deity would do. You invent something new. You begin with a dream, a drifting idea that flutters down like ash from a burnt offering. What if the theater had beats? Not just dramatic ones, but structural ones, crescendos, valleys, interludes. Time not only to grieve and gasp, but to breathe, to snack, to gossip, maybe even nap. Yes, a pause, not from worship, but as worship, a sacred intermission. You test it gently at first. During one festival, you send a breeze, cool and brief, through the crowd after the second play. Not enough to disrupt the performance, but just enough to lift sweat-soaked hair and raise the question, wouldn't now be a nice time to pause? Mortals don't get the hint. So you try again. This time you nudge a flute player. He slips in an improvised melody after the second act, a light, lilting tune that doesn't match the tragedy's tone at all. It causes confusion. The crowd looks around, the actors freeze, the chorus awkwardly resets their formation. And yet, something clicks. People shift in their seats, stretch. Someone shouts, "Do we have time for wine?" A moment later, the chorus resumes, slightly more out of breath, but now the audience is listening again. Refreshed. You grin. The experiment continues. The next year, you inspire a playwright to write an intentional break between his tragedies. He calls it The Void of the Gods. It's 15 minutes of nothing, just music, no dialogue, no movement, just a flute, a harp, and the audience. People complain, they also don't leave their seats. They sit, they murmur, they reflect. Some even close their eyes. You're getting close. Next comes your favorite innovation yet, figs. During one particularly hot festival, you nudge a chorus boy to share his snack during the break. He offers dried figs to the man next to him, who accepts gratefully, then shares with another. Soon the entire audience is passing fig bundles, hand to hand. The actors return to find a crowd chewing, chatting softly, and most importantly, engaged again. Your entrance was sublime, one man tells the lead actor, bits of figs stuck in his beard. You float above the crowd, arms folded like ivy vines, it's working. But not everyone is thrilled. A few stern-faced elders stand during the break and recite poetry on purpose, determined to keep the sanctity of the theater pure and uninterrupted. They deliver long, booming odes to honor and silence. One even lectures a child for humming too joyfully. You make his sandals untie themselves mid-performance, twice. Still, you know you have to legitimize this thing. Make the intermission feel not like a lapse in drama, but a feature of it. A continuation of the sacred story, not a detour. So you go bigger. You visit a poet in his dream, an eccentric one who once wrote a play from the point of view of a bronze statue. You whisper an idea, write a scene about a pause ordained by the gods. He does. And in the middle of his next play, after a particularly intense scene of murder and prophecy, a character collapses and declares, "We must wait." Even the gods demand silence before fate unfolds. It's hokey, it's brilliant. The crowd loves it. The priests murmur approval. The playwright takes a bow. A theater official scribbles in his scroll, "Insert pause here." You smile. Because it's done. Official. Not just tolerated, respected. The first true theatrical intermission, born from boredom, figs, and divine meddling, is now a ritual. Vendors begin planning around it. Actors adjust their masks and gargle with honey water during the break. Flute players compose intermission tunes. Even the grumpiest philosophers concede, yes, perhaps a pause does allow one to absorb the thematic density more fully. Of course, they still call it the Dionysian drift, as if the break is some kind of divine daze. And you're fine with that. Let them intellectualize it. You know what it really is? A gift. To the audience, to the actors, to the art itself. Because sometimes the most sacred thing you can do is nothing at all. The flute plays softly an aimless, wandering melody, just enough to hush the chatter without feeling like it's trying too hard. You, Dionysus, watch from your invisible perch as something unprecedented unfolds. The audience stretches, not metaphorically, literally. They rise, they turn, some walk, some stay seated and gently twist their ankles, grateful for the chance to feel blood return to their lower limbs. A few are dramatically flopping backward onto the stone benches like wounded heroes, groaning about cracked tailbones and the tragedy of aging hips. Someone's sandals are off. Someone's having a minor nap with a fig in each hand. One guy near the front is doing push-ups for no reason. It's glorious. This now is a real intermission, and the crowd is finally starting to own it. You've watched it form from whispered pauses and accidental breaks into a full-blown orchestrated event. But now, Swam, it's time to give it flair. Energy, a Dionysian signature. You start with music. Satyrs, your eternal entourage, chaotic and hairy and never quite sober, slip down the hill in a line, each one blowing a double-reeded aulos or banging a shallow drum. Their entrance isn't announced. They don't need one. People smell the goat sweat and hear the rhythm long before they appear. The crowd parts like the Red Sea of Attica. The satyrs prance and twirl, their little horsetail aprons bouncing with every step. They're not in the play, but they are part of the show. One does an impromptu jig with a small child. Another balances a fig cake on his nose. A third starts telling jokes that are definitely not appropriate for any festival, but especially not one with clergy nearby. The priests pretend not to laugh. Vendors see an opportunity and pounce. Fresh olives, cracked open and soaked in garlic brine. Honey-drizzled barley cakes wrapped in grape leaves. Tiny cups of sour wine that make you wince but feel absolutely perfect in the middle of a dusty spring afternoon. Even the poor spectators, clutching their simple travel rations, hard bread and salted fish, join in, swapping bites with neighbors. No one stays still. No one remains bored. The intermission is no longer a silence between plays. It's a scene of its own. Some scholars, centuries later, will stumble across pottery shards depicting this very moment. They'll argue over what it means. Is it a ritual, a parody, a spontaneous peasant uprising involving figs? You won't answer, because for you, Dionysus, it doesn't matter what they call it. You know exactly what's happening. Mortals are learning to live in the in-between. You spy a pair of playwrights talking in hushed tones on the theater's edge, watching the intermission unfold like a second act. They scribble notes, have character eat mid-monologue, add satyrs to serious scene, consider built-in dance break. Their scribbles won't go to waste. Intermissions inspire creativity. Without the rigid march of back-to-back tragedy, people experiment. Performers warm up in public view. Musicians start offering mini performances. Audience members reenact their favorite death scenes from the first play, with wildly incorrect lines and far too much fake choking. Even the chorus starts to lean into it. Instead of retreating backstage, they re-emerge in their masks and robes, but casually. They interact with the crowd. They gossip as their characters. One mock scolds a boy for throwing pomegranate seeds. Another hands out mini scrolls of the next play's plot summary. You chuckle. Spoilers weren't a problem yet, but satire? Oh, that's always been fair game. There's a soft warmth to it all. Sun on tunics, music in the air, food on every other lip. You've turned a lull into a liturgy, a moment of pause into a ritual of laughter, reflection, and mild digestive chaos. Not everyone's thrilled, of course. One philosopher loudly declares the intermission to be a mockery of all sacred things and gets pelted with sesame cakes. His toga gets honeyed. You don't intervene. He probably deserved it. Back in the heart of the crowd, someone begins telling a story, loudly with dramatic flourishes. It's not a play, it's a memory. An old woman recalling how she saw Thespis himself once, painted face and all. Her voice quivers, and the crowd listens. Even here, even now, between tragedies, storytelling survives. And that's what matters. Because in this invented space, this gift of a pause, you've created something more than a break. You've built a community. Everyone returns to their seat a little different, a little looser, a little more awake. They've tasted, they've laughed, they've complained about the satyr who stole their fig. They've lived. And when the flute plays again, this time solemn, purposeful, like a curtain being drawn, they're ready. The actors step out, masks in place. The chorus aligns. The sun dips just slightly westward. And the tragedy resumes. But now the audience feels it. Because you gave them time to remember what it means to be human first. So there it is, the intermission, no longer a whispered detour or a clumsy silence, but a thing. With music, with dancing, with suspiciously agile satyrs flipping fig cakes and making the priests look nervous. And you, Dionysus, the mastermind of it all, lounge like a lizard in the sun, absolutely delighted. But not everyone shares your enthusiasm. From the high marble steps of the temple overlooking the theater, the priests are watching closely. White-robed, solemn, fanning themselves with leaves of myrtle, they see the intermission and they don't see reverence. They see eating, laughing, a small boy doing cartwheels in front of the altar, a satyr who may or may not be using the sacred grape press as a drum. This isn't sacred, one mutters, eyes narrowed. This is frivolity. And that, of course, is the point. You, Dionysus, have never been about grim obedience. You're the god of ecstasy, of revelry, of letting go. And the intermission? It's not a distraction. It's a sacred release, a reminder that humans aren't just vessels for suffering. They're creatures of rhythm. They need lightness with their dark, honey with their vinegar. Still, a few priests file a formal complaint. The official word, the integrity of the festival is at risk. The unofficial subtext, someone mistook a ceremonial urn for a fig basket. You respond the only way a god should. You send them a dream. One where they themselves are trapped in an endless tragedy, sitting stone still while monologues drone on, unable to stand, unable to speak, just listening forever. The next morning, the complaint is mysteriously dropped. Meanwhile, the crowd doesn't care. They've embraced the intermission fully. It's not just something that, happens. It's something they look forward to. They plan around it. They pace their wine. They argue over where the best fig seller is stationed this year. Some even arrive late on purpose, knowing they'll still catch the last two tragedies after enjoying the full intermission experience. You overhear one merchant boast, "I only come for the break now. The figs, the music, the guy who juggles goatskin wine bags, pure theater." You're flattered. But it's not just the audience changing, it's the actors too. The intermission, once a brief backstage gasp, is now a gift. A chance to reset, to breathe, to whisper last-minute notes to each other in the shade, or sneak a sip of cool water infused with rosemary. One tragedian even uses the pause to change masks entirely, not just the physical mask, but the character. A risky move, narratively speaking, but the crowd loves it. They cheer when he reappears in Act 3 as a completely different cursed soul, now bald and raving. Historians still argue whether the intermission changed how tragedies were written or whether plays began to adapt to the break's existence. You, of course, know it was both. The rhythm shifts. Playwrights start writing to the break. They insert cliffhangers, monologues that trail off into silence, endings that invite speculation. One clever dramatist ends his second tragedy with a single quiet line. And then the gods vanished. The crowd erupts. Where do they go? Will they come back? Is the next play even about the same people? The intermission becomes a time of theorizing. Mortals gather in excited clusters, dissecting what they have just seen. He's not really dead. She's not really blind. It's a metaphor. It's his twin brother. No, it's definitely just symbolic liver failure. The philosophers take notice. At first they scoff. Plato writes something snide about the decay of sacred storytelling into gossip and snacks. But even he can't help himself. He shows up with grapes tucked in his sleeve and argues with a teenager about the tragic structure of Euripides' Medea. The intermission has become something dangerous and divine, a space for opinion. It's unstructured, but essential. A swirl of impressions, questions, laughter, and skepticism. It's exactly the kind of ambiguous living moment you live for. Because you, Dionysus, are not a god of rules. You are a god of tension, of contradiction, of intoxicated clarity. And the intermission? It's all of that. It blurs the sacred and the profane. It sits between worship and entertainment. It mocks the gods while celebrating them. It lets mortals laugh at death before watching it unfold again in verse. There's a beauty in that. Of course, a few still resist. One ambitious city official tries to outlaw food during the break, claims it's unseemly to eat between stories of divine justice and familial murder. He is pelted with olives so hard he has to duck behind a column. The people have chosen. The intermission stays. Even temples eventually relent. One priest admits, quietly, over a shared honey cake, that the pause does seem to make people pay more attention to the final act. It's as if their minds reset, he murmurs. They're quieter, more ready. And that's the point, isn't it? The tragedy hits harder after the laughter. The final mass seems heavier after the music stops. The gods feel closer when the crowd has just spent 20 minutes pretending they don't exist. You raise your wine goblet in silent celebration as the intermission ends once more. The crowd settles, the actors return, the chorus takes a breath in unison. The story continues. But the pause? That's where it lives. You wake to the hollow ring of the dinner bell, twice for third class as always. The corridor smells like coal dust and boiled greens. You rub your eyes, swing your legs down from the bunk, and join the slow-moving tide of passengers heading toward the dining saloon. By now, you know the rhythm of this place. The same dishes cycle in and out. Soup, stew, bread, pudding. Soup again, sometimes fish, sometimes beef. Always cabbage. But the predictability isn't dull. It's oddly comforting. Like a clock that always ticks, even in the middle of the ocean. Tonight's meal? Rice soup, again. Oops, wrong script. That was Titanic. Let's reset. You're still in the theater of Dionysus. Only now it's deep into the afternoon. The shadows stretch long over the marble. The sun bakes the hillside. And as the last chorus fades from the second tragedy, you already know what's coming. The break, that glorious, anticipated, belly-grumbling, soul-refreshing, absolutely necessary pause. And this time it's different, because today, the intermission has been announced. A herald stands at center stage in a gold-threaded tunic, arms spread wide like he's about to declare war or lunch. "Citizens," he bellows, voice echoing across the stone, "the intermission is upon us." All is. The crowd cheers for a pause. You've never been prouder. This is no longer a coincidence of timing or a sneaky excuse to stretch. This is official, ritualized, part of the show. Vendors pour in like an invading army. One has grapes in neat little cones. Another balances jars of marinated cheese on his head. The sesame cake seller is shouting rhymes about digestion and divine approval. And the wine guy, he's already surrounded. His cups clink like wind chimes in a Dionysian breeze. Some people stay in their seats, content to fan themselves and discuss the themes of betrayal, family curses, and whether the lead actor is actually limping or just trying something bold. Others wander, reuniting with friends, comparing fig prices and looking for shade. But something new is happening too. There's performance in the intermission now. Not just flute music or satyr shenanigans, but structured, planned acts. Miniatures, short plays, a slapstick scene involving a lost sandal and a very angry chicken. A 2-minute ode to a turnip, delivered with heartfelt tears by a man in a too small tunic. A puppet show reenacting the first tragedy of the day. Only the hero now sounds suspiciously like an Athenian tax collector and gets squashed by a goat. You, Dionysus, are beside yourself. They've turned the intermission into a festival within the festival. The term catches on fast. Mini Dionysia, someone calls it, the between time. You prefer that one. There's something poetic about it. Between pain and prophecy, between death and fate lies, roasted almonds and sock puppets. A few actors get jealous. They argue with the organizers, claiming the break is stealing their thunder. We rehearsed for months, and now everyone's quoting the turnip guy, but secretly, they love it. Because when the break ends, the crowd returns bigger, louder, more emotionally primed. They're charged, like a chorus of mortals drunk on sugar and story. And so the cycle continues. Play, pause, play again. Mortals start calling it the breath, as in, what did you think of the breath today? Or, the breath was better than the tragedy, honestly. There's talk of turning the break into its own competition. Best intermission act would come with an amphora of premium olive oil and a golden fig. One year it rains during the intermission, and no one leaves. They just huddle under shawls and keep going. A man sings an ode to soggy barley cakes, another pretends to be Zeus striking thunder out of his sandal. The crowd shrieks with laughter. You whisper to the storm cloud, "Nice touch." And yet, through it all, the core remains. This isn't just fun, it's part of the flow. The emotional reset that lets people dive back into tragedy with their hearts wide open. Historians later write scrolls about this. The structured pause in early drama. Intermissions and the sacred gap. The turnip as a symbol of civic catharsis. You roll your eyes, but you're flattered. Even the temples adapt. One festival builds a sanctuary of stillness just for the intermission. Pillowed alcoves where people can nap or quietly argue about metaphors. Your favorite addition? The complaint scroll. A long piece of parchment laid out during the break where audience members can write anonymous opinions about the plays. Too much screaming, not enough stabbing. Chorus was out of sync. I think my husband is asleep. Eventually, someone performs the complaints as a tragedy. It becomes the most popular act of the year. You bless them with a small vineyard. And so, the intermission stops being just a gap. It becomes an art, a living, shifting, snack-filled miracle of mortal innovation. And it's all yours. You stretch lazily beneath a myrtle tree growing just above the theater, its leaves whispering with the breeze, the slope below you alive with post-pause energy. The flute has sounded its solemn note. The audience rustles like a flock of settled birds. The chorus gathers again in their tunics and tragedy masks, and the final play of the day is about to begin. But down in the dust, a new element is creeping into the sacred space: feedback. Mortals, as it turns out, have opinions. And now that they have had time to air them during intermission, over figs and wine with crumbs in their beards, they're not about to stop. The era of the theater critic has begun. The first one is harmless enough. An elderly man with a bald head and a booming voice who announces loudly to his whole row, "That monologue was better last year. He hit the I ams sharper." His friends nod sagely. None of them have written a single line of verse in their lives. You, Dionysus, smirk. Because with intermissions came reflection. And with reflection came peer reviews et misty. Soon, clay cups and fig leaves double as impromptu scorecards. Play 1, 7-10, confusing death scene. Play 2, 9-10, excellent chorus, love the lightning effect. Word spreads fast. One man, rumored to have once shared olives with Sophocles, becomes a local legend just for loudly declaring the second tragedy was structurally shallow. A woman throws a pomegranate at his head. From the steps of the temple to the shady grove behind the stage, reviews are whispered, argued, shouted. Someone starts carving critiques into stone slabs. Another begins distributing leaflets made of papyrus scraps, titled "The Olive Branch, Dramatic Opinions for the Discerning Spectator." Its first headline? Too much screaming, not enough catharsis. You nearly cried. But even critics get thirsty. Enter a new breed, vendors who combine food with snark. Seder snacks, now with extra commentary, says one stand. They hand out sesame balls stamped with faces. Happy mask for good reviews, frowny mask for bad. Edible ratings. One performer, hurt by a particularly scathing snack review, starts sneaking into the intermission crowd in disguise to hear what people really think. He returns to Act 3 a changed man, and also slightly drunk. The playwrights notice. They begin planting lines in the second tragedy that wink at the audience. Perhaps the chorus will speak in rhythm this time, one actor jabs. The crowd howls. It becomes a metagame. Critique and respond, critique and adapt. Even the chorus joins in. During one pause, they improvise a little verse. We weep and shout, our lungs near torn, but still old Cleon yawns with scorn. He wants more death? Then wait till Act 3. We've saved the stabbings, just for thee. The crowd gives a standing ovation. Now the audience feels seen, heard, respected. Theater isn't just something done to them, it's something they participate in. But of course, not all feedback is golden. One audience member spends 3 full festivals shouting, "Bring back the goat," during every intermission. He is politely asked to leave, twice. You make sure he finds a small vineyard to yell at instead. Backstage, the playwrights begin to dread intermissions, not for the chaos, but for the expectations. There's now pressure. The break is where they talk, mutters one anxious young tragedian. We must earn their return. And that, ironically, improves the art. Writers dig deeper. They build cliffhangers, twist endings, emotionally complex characters whose fate people argue about over almond cakes. Was it justice? No, it was definitely murder. Same thing. These aren't just plays anymore, they're cultural events. One performance ends so dramatically that the crowd refuses to leave during the break. They sit in stunned silence, whispering prayers to no one in particular, clutching each other's tunics. A vendor tries to sell peanuts. He is shushed with terrifying intensity. You smile, because you see what's happening. The intermission has made the audience sharper, hungrier. They've learned to demand more, and theater rises to meet them. Even the city council notices. They declare a new role, the intermission steward, a local poet who walks among the crowd during breaks, recording opinions and reporting them anonymously to the actors and playwrights. It's the ancient version of a comment section, with sandals. The steward's scrolls become prized possessions. One includes the now famous line, "The hero's grief felt authentic, but I question the realism of surviving a 6-spear wound with no limp." Another simply reads, "Bring more dogs." Playwrights take notes. Some adjust their scripts between festivals. One adds a dog. It becomes the most beloved character of the season. And now, as tragedy resumes after each intermission, there's electricity in the air. Not just curiosity, but investment. The crowd isn't just watching, they're waiting, they're hoping they've been heard. And you, Dionysus, bask in the middle of it all. The god of masks, of transformation, of wine-stained robes and wandering souls. You have shaped more than stories. You've shaped a dialogue between artist and audience, between ritual and reality, between suffering and relief. Because the intermission, it didn't weaken the theater. It completed it. You recline now against a pillar as smooth as river-washed marble, watching the drama unfold, not just on stage, but in the wings, the aisles, and the break-time gossip circles now pulsing like a secondary chorus. This is theater in full bloom. Civic, sacred, sweaty, and slightly sticky with wine. But your gaze drifts backstage. Because while the audience has discovered the beauty of the pause, the actors, they've discovered necessity. There is, it turns out, only so long a person can shout about betrayal and fate before their throat rebels. Only so many masks one can change with trembling hands before someone forgets to put the right one on and ends up accidentally comforting the wrong corpse. You, Dionysus, see them, the tragedians crouched behind the scenery, gulping water between scenes, fanning themselves with scraps of costume and mouthing lines like prayers. These performers aren't just playing heroes, they're enduring like them. The intermission has become their savior. At first, it was just time to breathe, but now it's strategy. One actor starts bringing a small towel to soak in cool water during the break. Another smears honey on the inside of his mask. For energy, he claims, though he also eats half of it before curtain. A lead actress in a sadder play designs a ritual of stretching her jaw like a lion before each return. For resonance, she says, and intimidation. You see it all, and you hear the whispered pleas to the gods, not lofty prayers to Olympus, but muttered bargains like, "Please let me hit that high note," and "Oh, divine Dionysus, let my sandals not squeak again." You, of course, nudge the soundscape accordingly. Sometimes. One day, a group of chorus members collapses onto a bench during intermission, drenched and panting like gladiators. "Can we petition for longer breaks?" one gasps. They do. And soon a new proposal is floated. Official, regulated intervals. Not just when it feels right, but scheduled, agreed upon, predictable. It changes everything. Actors begin to time their energy. They pace themselves like marathoners. One lead performer works with a friend who happens to be very good with sand timers to measure how long each scene takes, ensuring he doesn't peak emotionally too early. He calls it mask management. Soon, every serious actor has an intermission routine. Some meditate, some rehearse, some just find the darkest shadow and close their eyes, whispering to their diaphragm, "You've got this." The break, once an awkward breather, now becomes the actor's sanctuary, their temple, their battlefield triage tent. And naturally, it evolves beyond the performers. Stagehands, often invisible, often overworked, use the time to fix sets, repair broken props, and yell lovingly at each other while untangling curtain cords. One poor assistant once glued himself to a painted thundercloud and had to be sawed off mid-play. The intermission saves him. Chorus leaders start requesting water carriers. Costume assistants learn to swap out sweaty chitons in under 2 minutes. A skilled boy becomes famous for retying sandal laces mid-break without ever touching the actor's foot. They call him the Silent Stitch. You bless him with unusually durable thumbs. And for playwrights, the pause is golden. Now they can structure their works with expectation. The pre-break build-up, the post-break twist. One experimental writer even uses the intermission itself as a narrative device. His second tragedy picks up mid-sentence, as if the character never stops speaking. It's bold, it's weird, it's a hit. The crowd eats it up like barley cakes. But not every adjustment is smooth. One actor misjudges his rest time and sprints on stage still half-dressed. He performs the entire third act with his mask on backwards. The audience assumes it's a metaphor for inner blindness. He wins an award. Another actor, emboldened by break time praise, decides to ad-lib half his final monologue. The result is 15 minutes of poetic nonsense about ducks and regret. It becomes a cult favorite. Students reenact it for generations. The intermission has made space for error, and in error, new kinds of beauty are born. You, Dionysus, feel this shift deeply. The theater has become alive, organic, self-aware, not just actors and chorus and audience, but an ecosystem, a loop. The intermission is the inhale between the cries. And you see something else taking root backstage, community. Performers who barely knew each other at sunrise now huddle over grapes, massaging sore calves and swapping advice. Lead with your right foot on that entrance. Pause longer on curse. It lands harder. These are not just roles, these are rituals. One group even starts a tradition. Every intermission, they gather hands, whisper the names of their characters, and dedicate the next act to a fig leaf placed on a stone backstage. No one really knows why, but no one dares stop. Some historians will one day say, the intermission professionalized the art of acting. But you know better. It humanized it. The gods may rule fate, but in the dusty backstage corners of Athens, mortals learned how to hold a pause in their hands like something sacred, and then return to the stage ready to break hearts all over again. The sun has shifted, its golden fingers stretch longer across the marble steps, and from your perch among the ivy and drifting fig leaves, you see it, a slow, hungry movement at the edges of the crowd. Not spiritual hunger, not today. This is the hunger of opportunity. You, Dionysus, smirk behind your wine cup, because where there's a pause, there's a profit. And the intermission, it's become a gold mine. You notice it first with the grape seller, a simple man up from the port with a donkey cart and a dream. He used to stand outside the theater gates trying to lure customers before the sun rose and tragedy took the stage. It was hit or miss. Sometimes people bought grapes, sometimes they ignored him, eager for sacred suffering and poorly timed bird flocks. But now that the intermission exists, he parks himself on the theater hill right as the second play ends and sells out in minutes. Other merchants catch on. First, the olive vendor, then the honey cake girl with the shrillest voice in Attica, then the goat cheese twins who turn their sales pitch into a duet. Soon the aisles between the rows of stone benches become a market. Not a formal one, no tents, no booths, but an improvised, buzzing bazaar. Cloth sacks open like blooming flowers. Carts squeak with the weight of sesame sweets in pickled onions. A man balances a tray of wine cups on his head like he's been training for this moment since infancy. Some say he has. The audience loves it. They can eat, they can shop, they can gossip with one hand and sip with the other. Someone even starts selling fans, cheap ones made of woven reeds with hand-painted portraits of famous actors, the first merchandise. You beam. One enterprising teen begins carving tiny masks into walnuts. For luck, he says, or for snacks later. He doesn't care. He's sold 20. A potter brings figurines modeled after popular characters, tragedy heroes, comic reliefs, an especially buff chorus member. One figure has removable limbs, which is both clever and slightly disturbing. It sells out. Vendors begin competing for space and attention. One wears a hat shaped like a wine jug. Another dresses like a satyr and dances while shouting, "Grapes so good, you'll forget your own tragic backstory." He trips, drops a tray, and becomes a local legend. Someone paints a mural of the moment on the temple wall. The caption reads, "Even the walls fall down sometimes." But the intermission economy isn't just about food and trinkets. It's about presence. You watch as philosophers sneak in with scrolls, offering dramatic commentary for a single coin. "Did you enjoy Act 1? They ask. "Oosh, about that's all now." Let me explain why you're wrong. One woman offers interpretations of the play based on the movement of birds overhead. Her theories are incomprehensible. People adore them. "The hawk means betrayal," she says, "or maybe indigestion. Maybe." A sculptor sets up a mini stall with quick busts of attendees. Your profile in clay before Act 3 begins. One is frighteningly accurate. One looks like a turnip. The subject buys both. And while it's chaotic, you notice something more sacred happening underneath it all. The sharing. People trade food, opinions, trinkets. A girl gives a boy her last honey fig in exchange for a whispered theory about the masked villain's secret identity. A vendor offers free snacks to a chorus member who's obviously too broke to buy lunch. The priest, even the priest, gets handed a paper cup of goat milk without asking. It becomes social glue. This economy, born in the pause, makes the theater feel less like an altar and more like a village. A moving, laughing, bargaining, debating village with room for everyone, from the sandal mender at the back to the senator's wife sipping diluted wine under a shade cloth woven from peacock feathers. Of course, not everyone's thrilled. The city council holds a meeting. "Is this capitalism?" one asks, squinting at a scroll. "Is this legal?" asks another. A third just wants to know who sold him cheese that turned out to be pressed barley and seawater. The merchants don't care. They organize. An unofficial intermission vendors guild forms. No rules really, just a loose agreement to not steal each other's fig piles and to shout in different rhythms so they don't overlap. It's chaotic. It works. One vendor suggests uniforms so people know who's official. Another replies, "If you can shout louder than the actors, you're official." That becomes the motto. Even performers get involved. A masked comic actor begins selling joke scrolls during intermission. One-liners, roasts, satirical rewrites of the day's tragedies. They're crude. They're hilarious. He starts charging double for autographed versions, which is impressive, considering he's wearing a mask and can't write. Theaters respond. Some try to limit the vendors. Only 10 allowed inside the performance space, but the audience protests loudly. One year, when a vendor ban is enforced, people stage their own intermission drama about the ban. It features a talking olive and a heroic goat. It wins more applause than the real tragedies. You laugh, because of course they would make a tragedy out of losing their snacks. That is the spirit of your festival. And so, the intermission economy becomes permanent and vibrant and very profitable. You watch it grow with pride, knowing that no other god, not Zeus, not Apollo, not even clever Hermes, could have orchestrated a sacred festival where figs, fart jokes, and fate-driven sobbing could exist side by side. Only you, only Dionysus. The intermission is no longer a pause, it's a passport, a cultural phenomenon that started as a mercy and became a movement. And now it begins to travel. You, Dionysus, have always been fond of the road. You've wandered from mountaintop to market, from cave to court, always barefoot and slightly buzzed, sowing chaos and creativity in equal measure. And the idea of the intermission, this sacred breath between acts, follows in your footsteps. It begins with Ephesus, a smaller theater, fewer seats, different dialect. But the plays are there, and so is the wine. And one enterprising young dramatist, barely out of apprenticeship, says, "Why shouldn't we rest between tragedies like the Athenians do?" Some scoff. "That's an Athenian indulgence," they say. "We don't have time for that. We're efficient. We're ionic." But when the local festival stretches past noon and the sun turns the marble to lava, they reconsider. The first intermission in Ephesus is clumsy. A flute player did its stage fright. A goat steals half the cheese. Someone falls asleep and misses the second half entirely. But the audience, they stay. They like it. They ask for it again. From there, it spreads. to Delos, to Rhodes, to the vineyards of Lesbos and the hills of Corinth. The break between tragedies becomes a whisper, then a tradition, then a demand. Each city adds its own flavor. In Samos, intermissions are filled with sea shanties and citrus drinks. In Thebes, the pauses are used for debates. Crowds split into groups to argue plot twists. In Delphi, someone reads oracles during the break. Every prophecy conveniently predicts a standing ovation. You, of course, are everywhere, sometimes visible. A vine crawling up a column, a shadow among the fig trees, sometimes just a feeling, a shiver of anticipation before a laugh, a shared look between strangers over a shared pomegranate. You are the intermission. Rome naturally takes it to extremes. You arrive one year disguised as a traveling poet with grape juice stains on your scrolls. The Romans are skeptical. Why stop, they ask. Why not just power through the entire performance with grit and discipline and loud yelling? You don't answer, you just wait. By mid-afternoon, the entire Colosseum-sized audience is muttering. The fifth actor has fainted. A vendor has collapsed into his date cakes. Someone tries to begin a chant. We want figs! You smile. Soon, even Roman productions build in breaks. Not out of reverence, but logistics. Theaters are bigger, costumes heavier, audiences more dramatic than the plays. Rome invents the cue break where a minor god or a convenient thunder sound announces a divine pause. You love it. Overacted thunder? That's your language. One Roman poet writes, the intermission is like the hinge of the play. Without it, the door falls off. You carve that into a hillside. But your favorite adaptation comes from Syracuse. Their version of intermission includes a brief parade. Children dress as characters from the first play and march through the audience. Everyone applauds politely. It's chaotic, unscripted, and half the time someone drops their wooden sword. You nearly cry with joy. And yet, as the intermission spreads, some philosophers begin to worry. They hold serious discussions under fig trees. Is the pause replacing the plot? Are we more interested in honeyed almonds than moral allegories? Should we tax intermission performances? You ignore them. They're the same ones who grumbled when actors started wearing masks. They'll always exist, and they'll always secretly enjoy the flute solos. Still, you enjoy stirring the pot. So you inspire a new school of dramatists, ones who write specifically for the intermission. Short pieces, satirical interludes, flash dramas, 5-minute tragedies about a man who loses his sandals and finds his dignity. They're performed during the break, often using the same props as the main play. One popular intermission piece is just 2 chorus members playing dice and complaining about their lines. It's a hit. Audiences start arriving just for the break. Merchants build special stalls for intermission-only goods. One offers quick grapes, eat them before Act 3. Another sells mid-tragedy masks, so audience members can weep with style. It gets so big, one city creates a festival of intermissions only. No full plays, just breaks. It's brilliant. It's ridiculous. It rains the whole time. Everyone remembers it fondly. And through it all, the essence remains. The pause is not escape, it's engagement. A moment to absorb, reflect, recover. Because tragedy without a break becomes unbearable. Comedy without a breather loses rhythm. And life without a pause? It's just noise. So you wander from town to town, planting vines in theater corners, whispering ideas into vendor dreams, blessing actors with second winds, and audience members with just enough energy to cry one more time. The intermission isn't just a tradition anymore. It's a legacy, yours. By now, your festival is legend. The plays are grander, the pauses more elaborate, the snacks more varied than even you, Dionysus, could have predicted. But something curious begins to happen, something deeply Greek and absolutely inevitable. The philosophers show up. At first, they're just part of the crowd, sitting in the shade, muttering about metaphors, squinting skeptically through the thick of the chorus. But now they come with scrolls. Now they bring theories. It starts with Plato. Of course it does. He arrives early, wrapped tightly in his himation, looking like he's already upset about something. He watches the tragedy, stays for the intermission, tastes a fig, listens to a satyr fart on stage, and nearly explodes. This, he announces to no one in particular, is the corruption of the soul. People nod, others throw almonds at him. He writes furiously. You lounging on a rooftop nearby grin. Because Plato isn't wrong, he just doesn't get it. In his mind, the intermission distracts from the message. The audience, in his view, should remain solemn, unbroken by laughter or food. Drama is meant to edify, not entertain. The pause interrupts the moral arc, he cries. You can't eat cheese while contemplating fate. He is booed. Aristotle, meanwhile, takes a different view. He sits back, wine in hand, fully enjoying the intermission snack parade. Later, he'll write about the catharsis of tragedy, the purging of emotion, the emotional release. And that requires structure, rhythm, a break to process, to feel. You bless his wine jug. Aristotle doesn't just tolerate the intermission, he understands it. Pacing, he writes later in the Poetics, is essential to the emotional journey. Historians will debate whether that line was inspired by a particularly good satyr sketch performed between tragedies. You know the answer. It was. Soon a whole generation of thinkers weighs in. Some call the intermission the breath of the city, a place where collective identity forms. Others call it a rupture in sacred space, or a democratic infection in an aristocratic art form. They write dialogues, essays, entire philosophies around the pause. Socrates himself is said to have stood during one intermission and asked loudly, "What is the purpose of waiting?" Someone responded, "So you can stop talking." And yet, even the grumblers stay. Even the sternest thinkers don't leave during the break. They snack, they debate, they enjoy the puppet show where Oedipus is played by a turnip. Because beneath all their words is a truth they won't admit. They like it. The intermission is human. It feels good. It makes the tragedy richer, not weaker. And it becomes, in its own weird way, respected. Temples begin acknowledging the pause in their festival calendars. Priests write prayers of digestion. One school of thought insists that the intermission represents liminality, the sacred space between being and becoming, a threshold, an initiation. We are not who we were before the break, one philosopher declares, holding a fig, and we will not be who we are now when the play resumes. Someone yells, "Just eat the fig!" And still, the conversation grows. It becomes common for citizens to quote intermission jokes at dinner parties, for politicians to use intermission metaphors in speeches. We are in the pause before greatness, one senator proclaims during a debate about aqueducts. The intermission leaks into life itself. People start calling any pause a Dionysian rest. If a conversation lulls, intermission. If someone zones out at work, intermission. If a marriage needs reflection, let's take an intermission. You are thrilled, because now mortals aren't just experiencing theater, they're living it. One traveling philosopher in a fit of inspiration or heat stroke suggests that perhaps life is a play, and intermissions are how we survive it. You live a little, he says, then pause. You weep, then pause. You love, pause. You lose, pause. You eat sesame cakes, pause. You give him a vision that night, just a short one. He dreams of a world where breaks are honored, where pauses are sacred, where everyone, no matter how poor or weary, gets time to breathe. He wakes up weeping into his cloak. And so the intermission, once dismissed as indulgent, becomes philosophical, not less important than the play, but its mirror, its relief, its soul. The thinkers write scrolls, the poets write odes, the vendors write slogans. Pause and reflect while supplies last becomes the catchphrase of a fig merchant with suspiciously good handwriting. Even playwrights join the fun. They begin layering their plays with references to intermission. Characters mention needing a break. Plot lines echo the audience's rest. One entire tragedy is written as a metaphor for the pause between life and death. It confuses everyone. It wins all the awards. You, Dionysus, raise your cup and nod, because you didn't just give them theater. You gave them timing. And now every philosopher, performer, vendor, and wandering priest must reckon with what you've created. Not just a new part of drama, but a new part of thought. The curtain, though not a literal one, falls. The final mask is lowered. The last echo of the chorus fades into the evening air like smoke from a sacrifice. And the crowd, they do not move, not right away. They sit in the twilight hush of the theater of Dionysus, blinking at the sky, now turning lavender. Their eyes are red from weeping, their bellies still full from honeyed cakes, their minds swirling with loss, betrayal, vengeance. and maybe a goat that wore sandals in Act 2. This is the afterglow, the sacred stillness. And you, Dionysus, god of theater and pause, of frenzy and fig bread, watch over them in silence. They've been through it today. 3 tragedies, 1 riotous satyr play, 2 fistfights over olive prices, and 1 spontaneous group sing-along during the intermission. The kind of journey only a mortal can take and still walk home from barefoot. But what's most astonishing isn't the endurance, it's the transformation. You see it in their posture, in their faces, in the way they wait before rising, as if reluctant to let the spell break. Because that's the thing about theater and about intermissions too. They create a space where time folds, where people become more than spectators, where pain and joy are shared across stone benches and amphorae of cheap wine. And in that strange, flickering space between stories, between the thunderous exit of a key and the soft crackle of a fig skin being torn, people come alive. You never wanted them to suffer. You wanted them to feel, and they did. The intermission gave them the room to do it fully. Without it, the plays would have flattened into blur. Without it, the audience would have staggered out, dazed and wordless. Without it, even the masks would have felt heavier than they were. Instead, they linger, reflect, laugh again, quietly. Someone hums the chorus's final melody. A child pretends to die heroically on a bench. An old man recites his favorite line to no one in particular. Vendors pack up slowly. A few give out their last treats for free. Take it, my figs don't travel. A flute player meanders a final tune, not for coins now, but just for the air. And up among the columns, a group of actors has gathered around a cracked amphora, sharing what went wrong, what went right, and how one of them forgot his line and covered it by shouting, "A plague upon foreshadowing." Everyone laughed, even the director. One actor, still in half mask, raises his cup. "To the pause," he says, "to the breath that saves us." They drink. You exhale knowing this is the end of something ancient, not the festival, not the plays, they'll return. But this day, this particular pattern of sorrow and rest, of wailing and wine, is done. It won't come again quite the same, but the rhythm will remain. The plays will change, the masks will evolve, but the intermission, that fragile, fleeting grace in the middle, will endure. It will travel through empires, through languages, through centuries. It will sneak into Elizabethan England as a candle-snuffing break. It will settle into the velvet of Parisian opera houses. It will echo in modern cinemas with popcorn and whispered plot debates. It will show up in living rooms during streaming sessions. Pause it, I need to think. And every time it appears, in every form and every place, it will carry your scent, grapes and laughter, and a whisper of something deeper. The knowledge that sometimes the most sacred thing we can do is stop. To look around, to taste, to listen, to breathe, and then, only then, to return, different than before. And so the crowd slowly disperses, back to their homes, their tasks, their lives. And the hill is quiet. The fig leaves rustle in the dark. You linger just a moment longer, barefoot and smiling, and then vanish. But the intermission remains, always. Now the last flute is silent. The crowd has wandered home, and even the satyrs are asleep beneath borrowed cloaks. The theater of Dionysus lies still in the moonlight, a quiet cradle of stone and memory. And you rest now too. You've wandered the marble seats, laughed at chorus jokes, eaten fig cakes with your fingers. You've wept at the fate of tragic kings, clutched your sides during satyr dances, and whispered theories into the cool attic breeze. But most of all, you've learned to appreciate the pause, that moment of stillness when everything holds its breath, between act and act, between opal and sorrow, between the thrum of life and the gentle call to sleep. The intermission wasn't just part of the performance, it was the performance. And maybe, as you lie back now in your own quiet theater of dreams, you'll carry that with you. The comfort of a break, the power of a breath, the knowing smile of a God who sees both frenzy and stillness as sacred. Let the world turn slowly for a while. Let the final curtain stay down. Tomorrow, the mass will go on again. But for now, let them rest beside you. You're safe here. You've earned the pause. Good night, friend of the theater, and thank you for joining the performance.